Welcome, everyone. I'm Shah. This is the Data Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm super excited today because Dmitri's here. He's joining me, and we're going to talk about all the mistakes he's made as a founder over these past 10 years or so doing this thing. So, he's been a 3-time product entrepreneur. He's been on Shark Tank twice, and now he's the founder and CEO of Peas, which is a company helping couples manage their finances. So, thanks so much for joining us, Dmitri.
Thanks for having me, man.
So I'm really curious about how you first got into entrepreneurship because looking at your background, you were a front end developer for a while. So what prompted that transition from being an individual contributor to being someone that's running the show or trying to build new products, trying to get customers, things like that?
So I was a software engineer for quite a while. I worked as a senior engineer at Lockheed Martin on the F-35 program, worked for an extremely large worldwide streaming company, worked for the largest retailer of reading glasses in the world for e-commerce. And throughout all of those experiences, I really kind of wanted to build something myself first. That was kind of the biggest motivator. And then a secondary motivator would be, I wanted to do something that was impactful. So a lot of the stuff that I was working on was just, I didn't get to see what happened afterward. Like, especially at Lockheed, that company's so massive. Like, I was working on some systems that supported the F-35 or the production of the F-35, but I had no idea what. I wasn't cleared enough to see what. So I was just shipping code and kind of going home. So I wanted to do something where I could see the impact of what I was doing and make people's lives better. That was like the two big motivations.
Yeah, I feel that a lot when I was working full time as a data scientist. It's very much like you're a cog in this machine and you have like a very narrow set of responsibilities and set of impact. But then as an entrepreneur, it's like the exact opposite where you're doing things you don't even necessarily want to do and you're having impact in like these new areas. So that's what I want to dive into now. Looking through your background, there were 3 products that stood out to me. It was Hydrant, Incorporated, Bundle, and Peas. And I was just thinking we could walk through each of them and just like reflecting on what these products were and what were some of your key lessons and takeaways from these experiences. So starting with Hydrant, like what was the genesis of this product? Like what was this product?
Yeah, so Hydrant and Bundle were stories in tandem, actually. So
Okay.
I joined kind of a startup incubator slash accelerator called Capital Factory down in Texas. They've got a hub in Dallas and a hub in Austin. And I was working on the early stages of something. I didn't know if it was going to be Bundle. I worked on a healthcare startup before that. I didn't know what it was, but I joined the incubator because I knew I wanted to do something. And I met a guy named Dave, and Dave had this wonderful idea to use firefighters to do handyman type work for residents and businesses. And the whole genesis of this was like, look, like you trust a firefighter, they save our lives, like they put a tremendous amount of work and effort for very little pay to keep our lives like safe. And why would you not want them to come into your home and, help you clean a gutter or break down a wall or lift something heavy, like why would you not want to pay for that service? And he was having a lot of trouble building product. And I had spent almost half a decade by that time building product. And I was like, look, man, I've got, great design skills. I know how to build software. I can help build this marketplace. And we joined forces, built something, launched it to market, and it took off really, really fast.
I feel like that's such a great niche, and I've heard of like other I feel like I've heard this idea in other places, but firefighters, I guess the key thing about how they work is like they work like these really long shifts, but then when they're off, they're like really off. So they have like a lot of downtime on those off days that they can do.
Yeah. So they have something called, well, it depends on which part of the country you're in, but they have mostly like a 24 hours on, a 48-hour off schedule.
Okay.
And what's really kind of unfortunate about that is it's really hard to hold a consistent or a full-time job. So a lot of them, their full-time job is, serving the community as a firefighter, and then they take odd jobs on the side. So the idea was to bring them an ecosystem and say, hey, look, we've got an army of firefighters that are willing to do anything for residents, or, if you're a business and you need to hire an army of firefighters to do something, like we've got them.
You said it took off really quickly. Like what was the trajectory of this idea? Like what was the impact? What was like the final outcome?
What ended up happening, we partnered with the International Association for Firefighters. So when we launched the product, we had quite a few precincts sign up. So we had, I would say like less than 1,000 firefighters sign up. We had about 5 to 10,000 users at this time. This was pre Shark Tank. And then we realized we needed more firefighters. We needed more coverage because we were only covering the areas in which the precincts were. So we talked to this association for firefighters and we're like, look, like let's partner together. You've got 100,000 firefighters across the nation. We have this product. I think it would serve your community really well. We struck a partnership, and I think it was like 80 or 90% of them signed up for the app over the next year and a half. And we had coverage across the nation. It was really, really cool to see. And then after that was when the Shark Tank thing happened. So, and the reason why I said this story is in tandem is by this time I had already started Bundil. Bundil had already started cooking. I had already been on Shark Tank, and I had made some friends there, and I had relationships with the casting director. And I reached out and I was like, look, there's this really incredible product that I had a big part in building and continue to advise and help. And I think you should take a look at it. And ultimately, Dave got on Shark Tank, went through the process, got aired. I think he was like season 13, episode 5. Hopefully that's right, but I don't know. And then a few years after that, it ended up selling. So we sold it December of 2023.
Oh wow. Okay. So maybe that's where I heard about Hydrant. I think it was on Shark Tank that I heard about this product.
Yeah, man.
Okay, so that's really interesting. You started Hydrant, you built that, and then you also started Bundle. Like while that was, so how did you have time to juggle both things?
Yeah, so Hydrant was in a really, really incredible spot because I was able to kind of take a step back because the product was already done. I had put place, so the agency in which I started my career, they were helping out with all the design and all the product now, so I didn't have to do that. We had a team of engineers, so a lot of my work was now like strategy, advising, more like leadership as kind of like a large equity holder. So I kind of was like, hey, might as well build something else, right? So, as serial entrepreneurs do. And that's when I came up with the idea of Bundle and started cooking on that. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there are two things that stood out about the Hydrant story before going on to Bundle. Like the first one is that you joined this incubator. Like I guess I don't know what to call a capital factory, an incubator, venture studio. I'm not sure like what the right terminology is.
yeah,
But like as a first time founder, like how was that experience for you? And do you think that's something that you would do again? Like kind of completely new to this world?
that's a really loaded question, actually. So, incubators and accelerators, I have a very specific relationship with them these days. I actually posted about this on LinkedIn about how it's really important to have a network when you're company building because your first customers, your first investors, your first supporters, people who could just help you like mentally support you during the grueling journey will be from that network. And if you don't have a network, I think there's a large opportunity in an incubator or a startup accelerator or something like that because you're given a network by proxy because so many people have gone through it. There's been so many success stories, and you automatically have access to founders, investors, advisors, like people who are willing to support you. If you already have a strong network, I don't think incubators or accelerators are the greatest because they are equity intensive. I struggle to say this like abruptly or strongly, but I do think when you're company building, if you're going to build a venture scale business where you take on investors, managing your cap table is really important. And I think those first points of equity, basically the first 20%, you really need to allocate extremely well. And if you have a co founder and you need to give up 6 to 9% to an accelerator, you need to make sure that it's worth it. Make sure the capital is worth it, the network's worth it. So for something like a YC, you're almost guaranteed a raise. If you go into YC, you're going to give up probably about 10% of your company, but you're guaranteed 2 to 3 million bucks in the bank account at the end. You're guaranteed a wonderful co-founder. You're guaranteed a really fleshed out and ferociously executable idea. And there's a lot of value there, right? Some of the other accelerators, there's another one that I've been a part of called Antler that invested in Peas, and they've been wonderful. They are extremely supportive. They have a investment match. So as I raise funds, they continue to invest to give us extra capital. They have a wonderful network of like high executors and operators and former founders from basically every part of the world and every country, discipline, and company you can think of. And they are also worth it. But there are some accelerators where they take a lot of the equity. They don't give you much cash. they offer the network or they offer the support, but the true value isn't really there. So I think founders just need to be really specific on how they choose those entities that they want on their cap table.
Okay, so it's the networking opportunities and the potential to raise capital because of the association, whether it's like Antler doing the direct match or YC because they're such a well-known name, like VCs are just going to give you money because you're in YC.
YCs, they're kind of the Harvard, they're the Yale of the startup community, right? Someone like an Antler is probably like a Brown. Like they've got a massive network across the world. They didn't even start in the US. They started, I actually don't know the genesis, but they started outside of the US and they built an ecosystem there and then came to the US and brought those resources over. So they have an incredible network. They have infrastructure. They know exactly like what capital is worth it for the equity that they take and what you need outside of that. They've taught me so much about go to market and sales and conversational engineering and like all of these like really small things that you don't think about until you're in it. I think choosing your partner is really, really important.
The other thing that stood out about the Hydrant story was that you found a co-founder, and it sounded like you were the technical co-founder. They were non-technical, like they had the idea, and perhaps they were like running the sales and go-to-market and things like that. How important do you feel like that was in Hydrant's success? Because I feel like this is something that a lot of investors look for. Like I've heard stories of VCs won't give you money, or investors won't give you money if you don't have that non-technical technical co-founder pair.
Yeah, that's a great question. So even though I'd love to take the technical co-founder title, I don't consider myself a technical co-founder with what I know now. Back then, I had the ability to understand product and design and engineering and how to architect because I had done it before. But when you're company building today, especially because building apps has, become something you can do in a weekend with AI, especially if you're building something really like technically strong, having a good, solid, like cracked engineer is extremely important. Someone who's not only dedicated to the mission and dedicated to building and dedicated to working with you, but someone who has the chops across multiple engineering verticals. So not just a front end engineer, not just a back end engineer, not just a mobile engineer, but someone who's truly full stack. Like they can work on Golang or Python or set up, a non-relational database or Postgres or SQL. Like they can go across all sorts of different constructs to help build something truly wonderful. And I think that's a mistake I've made way too many times. I've chosen co-founders who aren't technical or don't have the ferocity or the yearning to build something like you have to have when you're company building. And I think it's something that you really, really need to consider. If you're building a business that requires less tech, it's not as important. But if you're building anything that requires any amount of like substantial technology, find someone who can support you in that way so that you guys can really support each other down the company building journey.
Okay, that's interesting. So, from your description, like maybe I wouldn't even consider myself technical because I've never built a mobile app. Like my web development skills are really lousy. Like it's just data science and machine learning where I have technical chops. So it's interesting that you say that. It sounds like the technical co-founder you'd be looking for is someone that is basically like a true full stack developer. Like they can build the back end, the front end, they can build mobile apps, they can build like websites. And I guess it depends on what specifically you're trying to build, but someone that encompasses all these different skill sets.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to ask you about Hydrant is like, what would you say is like your number one takeaway? Because it seemed like a very formative experience during that period is when you had the Shark Tank opportunities and I'm sure you met a lot of people, through Capital Factory. So I don't know, like what was your biggest like takeaway or lesson that you still use today from that experience?
That's a really good question. I'm taking a bit of a pause to think. So I think the biggest takeaway that I have is understanding that I've mentioned this already in us talking, but understanding the type of grind it takes, the type of tenacity that you need to have, the vigor that you need to have, ups, downs, sideways, like the persistence, like all of those things were something I was able to see in Hydrant, not only in myself, but also in Dave. Dave is one of the few people that I've seen who, so just to shout out Dave a little bit, he started Hydrant when he was 50 years old. And he went down this grind and this just grueling path to get to an exit at that age. He had kids that he was taking care of. I think he has like 3 or 4 kids. And he was relentless, and he taught me and he showed me like, hey, like the best thing that you can have, even if things are going wrong, even if there's disagreements, even if there's, issues during the company building process, if you're relentless, you will always win. Sam Altman talks about this. Anybody, insert big name in the startup ecosystem, they talk about this. Like one of the biggest key indicators that I would look for in a founder, if I was a fund manager, or I would look for in a co-founder, is being relentless and continuing no matter what.
There's a thing I hear Alex Hormozy say a lot is you can't fail if you don't quit. And I feel like that relentlessness, that tenacity is a big part of the equation. So let's go on to Bundil, which overlaps with Hydrant. But like, what was that product, and what led to that?
Yeah, so Bundil was the acorns for crypto. So you could invest your spare change from debit and credit card purchases into cryptocurrency. If you wanted to go buy a coffee for $3.45, you would round up the extra 45 cents to the next dollar and invest it into a cryptocurrency that you chose. There's a lot with Bundil. I'll do the quick hits. We had 100,000 active users. We were doing about $10 million a year in transaction volume. We had an incredible run. Obviously, I was on the TV show Shark Tank, season 10, episode 3. And really, it was kind of the next whirlwind of like what the company building process looks like, because this time I was doing it on my own. This time I was going through my own selection process of finding a co-founder and building a team and figuring out, what distribution looks like. In the early days of Bundil, we only had a few hundred users. We made the decision to launch on Product Hunt. And that led to being discovered by a scout for ABC and Sony. So a lot of people don't know there's 2 ways to get on Shark Tank. So you can go to a casting call, which I think everybody knows, where you go and pitch your business to, the scouts that are there. And if they like you, they bring you to, another session to see if you'll be selected. Or they have scouts that go find companies that fit specific narratives. And at the time we were building Bundil, crypto was exploding. This is the first explosion, not the second downturn and then the third explosion that we're in now. We went through that process. They loved that they could understand what we were doing, and it was something that had to do with Bitcoin and crypto, and we got in pretty fast. So after that, we went through the process. We filmed in July of 2018, and then we aired in October, and the rest is basically history. We had an amazing distribution network because they re-air the show all the time. I think we were getting like 10 to 25 users a day just from like being on the show, which was amazing. We had obviously the brand recognition. It was a really, really, really great experience.
So did any of the sharks invest in Bundil, or this was just because of being on the show you were getting all this traction?
We got a deal with Kevin O'Leary. This is something that I have not disclosed until now. So you're actually the first podcast to get this.
We got the scoop.
You get the scoop. So we didn't actually close the investment with Kevin. So you'll hear in the space, and now that the company's gone and everything's, all said and done, I feel comfortable talking about this, but a lot of the deals on Shark Tank don't close, almost 80 to 90% of them. So, we went through and, I still have connection to O'Leary Ventures, but we just ended up not pursuing the deal. It wasn't commensurate to what we thought the value was. So, he wanted 50% of the company for a relatively low dollar amount. And luckily at the time, I had enough experience and enough wisdom to say, hey, look, I think we're worth more. And I think giving up 50% is going to cause a lot of issues, because it will. And this is something that I would advise founders today, like no matter who it is, even if it's the biggest billionaire on the planet, if you give up 50% of your company, it's like driving a car with somebody else's hand on the steering wheel. And as everybody knows, especially if you're racing, which I would compare the startup environment to a racetrack. If you're racing, you don't want somebody's hand on the steering wheel. You want them maybe giving you instructions and guidance and what moves to make, but you want to be in control. So that's something that I luckily had the wisdom to understand at that time in my life.
So for Bundil, you said it was like acorns, but for crypto. So you take your spare chains, it would get invested into crypto. So I see the value for the user, because, crypto, it's kind of like people buy crypto as like an investment kind of thing, and it goes up, and that's the idea. Like crypto keeps going up and people make money. I'm not super into crypto. Maybe you can tell by like how I'm talking about it, but I can imagine like there's this incentive, because like you buy your coffee every week, and then Bitcoin goes up to 100,000, and like you just made like, a bunch of money. But how did Bundil make money through this process?
Yeah. So we charged a monthly fee. So a lot of the different projects and crypto companies that were being started at the time really focused on transaction volume, which arguably could have been a better play for money growth, right? Like if we had done that, we would have made more money, but I felt more comfortable building something that was more sustainable and better for the type of user that we had. So we learned while we were building that the user that wants to invest their spare change, the user that wants to kind of passively enter a new asset class, is not the ferocious like crypto trader, right? It's moms and dads and people who are like much further down the financial walk of life, someone who is just exploring what crypto is, right? So we didn't want to be honestly predatory in that way. So we charged a really simple monthly fee. It was $3 at one time and then $5 later on a month. And you got unlimited access. You could round up your spare change into any crypto you wanted. You had different roundup options. You could do 50 cents every single time, a dollar every single time, or up to the next dollar, which is the reference that I described earlier. And we also, at the end of the company life, we started adding stocks to where you could do the same thing into individual stocks as well. So we really were building an ecosystem that provided the person who doesn't know like about crypto, such as yourself, a way to invest passively without like getting too involved.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you didn't do a volume based revenue. So you kind of like cut your upside, but it kind of made more sense for the specific customers that you guys were going after.
Correct. Because, you know, and now like Coinbase has done a wonderful job at bringing that volume based model to commercial, like to people who don't know about crypto. But at the time, even they were struggling. Like they were still
Right.
trying to figure out like what the best pricing model was.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that they launched something called Coinbase One, where you can pay a monthly fee to reduce your trading fee. So they realized that trading volume has its risks. So once we went through that first downturn where crypto was like,
Yeah.
we thought it was dead, people realized that there was no volume and they started, you know, losing money. So they
Yeah.
realized that they needed a hedge. And this is something that we realized really early as well from like a strategy standpoint.
Interesting. So what happened with Bundle? Was this another exit or what was the story there?
Bundle got assassinated, unfortunately.
Oh gosh.
So two main things. I had some co-founder issues with this one. That was one of the bigger inflection points that we had. And then the second really big one was we lost our liquidity provider. So once the fraud case with FTX happened, our liquidity provider got shaken up in that. They were unable to provide us the support that we needed. They were unable to continue KYCing users. We just had a lot of struggles with how we could operate with them. And we needed to find a new liquidity provider. And people in the space may know when you switch liquidity providers, it's really, really expensive. So not only do you have to pay their like onboarding fees and setup fees, but you also have to re-KYC every single user. So if you've got 100,000 people and it costs $2 to re-KYC them, now you have a $200,000 bill. So, and then additionally, the user experience, the user has to go in and like re-enter all of that information, re-enter their social security, their ID, take their selfie, all that good stuff. So we made the decision at the time, like, look, crypto isn't in a great spot. This was at end of 2022. We don't think this is something that we should continue. You know, we returned almost all of our funds to the users, and then we returned all of, like the investments that we had taken on thus far, or what we had left, and wound the company down.
So there were two major things you just said. So one was the co-founder issues, and then the other one was like this massive cost that came up because you had to switch liquidity providers. Of those two, like what do you feel like? I know both of them were devastating, but like which of the two do you feel like had a more negative impact on the company?
Kind of staying on the same theme of what I said earlier, I think with the right co-founder, we could have solved past anything. No matter if it's Armageddon in your startup, everything's breaking, the world's ending. If you've got the right co-founder, you can always build past it. You can always push past it. There's always a pivot. There's one iteration away from building something great. And that's why I mentioned that, because like when we had those issues, there was no turning back. Like once that happened, basically if a crack happens in the foundation, you know, and you drop a boulder on it or a wrecking ball on it, foundation's going to break. So that's why I mentioned like having a really strong co-founder who has that ferocity and has the yearning to build with you is so incredibly important.
So I guess looking back, what would you say is like your biggest takeaway or lesson from the bundle experience?
So it's actually shifted. I've been on a few podcasts where I would talk about the co-founder thing or talk about not putting all your eggs in one basket, because I think us relying on Wire from a liquidity standpoint was really a poor decision on our part. Now, I think the big takeaway now that I've built companies after Bundle, and I'm building one right now, is how valuable distribution is. So one of the things that I took for granted is that we had, they say $1 million worth of advertising with the Shark Tank appearance. And that's real. Like we had real users coming to us all the time. And we didn't have to think about how we were going to distribute as often. Like, yes, we did run ads. We did try to acquire users, from different sources, but we had a steady small stream of users that could come and help us validate and provide revenue and provide growth. And that is a superpower. So a lot of the founders that you see today who have incredible distribution channels or markets that they can tap into really uniquely, those are powerful founders because they can do things that others can't.
Interesting. So it's owning your distribution or just having that way to get your message out, like to let customers know about your product and like I guess figuring that out. I feel like maybe now that's why content creation is becoming more and more popular. Like more and more people are starting like podcasts and starting YouTube channels and things like that. So I
Personal
feel
brands, man.
yeah, I feel pretty lucky that I just accidentally stumbled into content creation. Is that something you have been considering, like starting up yourself, or?
Yeah. So as you can see, the studio behind me is set up for such things. I've been advised heavily by mentors of mine, people who are in the content space. I want to shout out a friend of mine. Her name's Leticia. She's building a company called Ingenious, who helps companies get in touch with content creators. And she screams at me basically to start a personal brand. She's like, "Look, like you have an incredible story. You've got incredible people following you. You've got a ton of people following you. Start a personal brand and start building some content because it'll be one of your distribution funnels for one of your products one day." I've been really kind of taking that to heart and kind of setting myself up to be able to do something like that. And as you know, I think we've talked about this, off camera before, but it's a process, like really kind of finding your niche and finding where you fit in and what type of value you provide takes a little bit of time. And it again takes some of that tenacity and ferocity that I was mentioning when co-founding something.
I'm looking forward to seeing the content. Now, have you decided on a platform? Is it LinkedIn, X, YouTube?
Yeah, so I recently met actually a new friend of mine. We've had some great conversations. His name is Jack, and he's been doing some incredible content on Instagram showing like the process of fundraising. And he's building a company called Habits, which connects people to financial advisors. I think like an Instagram slash YouTube play is going to be where I fit well. I think kind of that short form, like reels, kind of like TikTok type of content is going to be great. But I really also like long form content. I like to kind of sit and do things like this, or I like to golf. So, like, if I'm golfing, I could talk about business while I'm golfing, or I like to play video games. I could talk about business and company building while I play video games. So, I think those two platforms are where I'm really drawn to.
Let's go to your current baby, which is Peas.
Yeah.
So, what is Peas? And then, like, what was that transition from like the failure of Bundle to starting this new thing?
I'll kind of give you the whole story, the genesis of Peas. So, at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, this is when we were going through the process of winding Bundle down. We were exploring what we wanted to do next. I was exploring like actual careers. Like I interviewed a few places. I interviewed with a couple of startups, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. At this time, my 2-year-old son, he was just born, so I was like, hey, look, maybe this is like the time to kind of settle down and take a break from the company building process. Throughout all of these kind of like things that were coming at me, I had a lot of friends and family going through divorce kind of all at once. And it was really weird. First, because I was surprised that so many people were going through divorce all at once. And second, because there was a common theme that I noticed throughout those conversations. So, and it wasn't necessarily about money, but it was about dissonance in financial lifestyle. So one person would be really frugal, one person would be really lavish. One person would make all of the money and one person would stay at home and take care of kids, or things like that that would cause a lot of disagreements and bottlenecks and issues in their financial lives. So did some research because I'm just an aggressively curious dude, and learned that 60% of divorces cite financial disagreements as the reason for divorce in the United States. And immediately I was like, that's dumb. Like, why are we divorcing over money? So came up with the idea of P's to use natural language to change how we do money. So if the issue is couples don't want to talk about money and have conversations and work through those issues together, why not introduce an AI who could be the liaison to those conversations? So we came up with the idea of P's, built our AI called Penelope, launched it out to the world, ended up building a really large wait list. So some of that content I mentioned, we went viral on TikTok and got a 14,000 person wait list, raised some venture capital, built an amazing team, and we just launched 9 weeks ago, and we've had some amazing traction. So we've got 2,000 active users. The rest of our waitlist is currently onboarding. We've had over 8,000 conversations, 60% chat with our AI every single week. We've got I think it's like 22 to 25% week over week growth. We've just got some wonderful traction and wonderful signals that we're building something that's really valuable for couples.
Okay, this is awesome. So I want to go from the very beginning of you've identified this pain point. How do you translate that? How do you narrow down a solution? How do you decide on that solution? Like, what was that process like for
Talk
Peas?
to people. I'm a freak when it comes to this. I will go out to like I literally went out to bars and like sniped couples like a stalker, like a creep, and like
Oh,
said, "Hey, look, I will buy you a drink. I will buy you your dinner. I'll buy you whatever. I need you to talk to me for 5 minutes."
how many people did you talk to?
Hundreds.
Wow.
Like, yeah, like the thing that I learned, because I have a background in product, right? So I've worked with Synchrony Financial, MetLife, helped build the UI for the Full Swing Golf Simulator. Like I've had some really cool experiences that taught me how to think about user research and understanding like the psychology of a user. And the only way you can understand their pain points and what inflection points they might be currently experiencing in something that you're wanting to build is to talk to them. I wanted to talk to as many people as humanly possible. I talked to people on our wait list. Every time my wife and I were out to dinner, if we saw a couple, I'm chatting, I'm talking to them. I talk to my friends and family, obviously. That's kind of like the first network. But really, just anybody who would listen to me, I asked them, like, hey, how do you do money with your partner? What issues do you run into? And then I started seeing common themes. I started seeing people who, for example, like Gen Z and millennials, they have a desire to keep their money separate. So from my research, 90% of them were keeping their bank account separate, and they had a central hub, a joint bank account where they would do like bill management or even savings. But where their money came in, they still kept that control. And that's where kind of like the genesis of the Peas ecosystem came from, is
Mhm.
because we wanted to replace that. Like there's no reason that you should be using kind of a boring joint bank account that you can't do anything with. Like, why not have privacy features or personal finance management features or budgeting features or all sorts of things that can help you manage your money better with your partner?
Interesting. So I'm just imagining you like walk up to a couple at like Chili's or something. And I feel like it's like two challenges there. Like one, maybe people don't want to be interrupted, but like two, people are quite reserved when it comes to money. So how would you open that conversation?
Yeah. So I'm not going to lie. I used my background to my advantage. So every time I approach someone, I would say, hey, look, this is not weird. I just want to ask you some questions about an app that I'm building. I was on the TV show Shark Tank with my last app, and I'm building something new. And that usually warms people up almost
Nice.
instantly. Everybody knows what Shark Tank is, and they understand, hey, this guy is just like building something, right? The other thing I learned when I didn't want to mention Shark Tank, because that also introduces a lot of bias because people kind of want to give nice answers or answers that make
Yeah.
them look good. I would just find like the right couple. So like it would be less like dinner experiences. It would be more like bars. Like
Yeah. Okay.
people are really approachable at a bar. Like even if they're kind of secluded and sitting and having a date, their server's going up and talking to them. So you can
Right.
also go up and talk to them. So
Yeah.
it's not weird at all.
Okay, cool. And then what were some of the key questions that you would ask them
Ooh,
to
yeah.
like, yeah, what are like one or two questions that you were asking during these interviews that you feel are like invaluable to just customer interviews in general?
Yeah, the biggest one is what money apps are you currently using? So we would get answers like, Rocket Money, YNAB, Monarch was starting to grow at this time. So we started getting Monarch, Coinbase, Robinhood, some of the standard apps there as well. And then the second question is, do you have a joint bank account or not? So what I wanted to understand is, do you do money jointly? Like, do you have that like sense of comfort to share your money with your partner, or do you keep things separate? And maybe 1% had a joint bank account. Most people kept things separate. And then when I dug a little more, that's when I figured out like, oh, they actually do have a joint bank account, but it's not really a joint bank account. It's just a hub. They still keep their money separate.
Interesting. So why these two questions specifically?
The first question is just more like to set the tone. I think the really important question is, do you have a joint bank account or not? That really informs how they think about money, right? So it
Mhm.
informs, how much do you trust your partner? Are you traditional mindset when it comes to money or not? The tools like was just my own research, like, hey, like who's in the space who we're comparing to, like who are we going to fight against, right? Like who has captured these couples' attention. But really understanding like the psychology of how they think about money came from that joint
Mm.
bank account question, because now we know like, hey, they're comfortable enough to just go all in. Like if they both have access to equal funds, no issues, right? Or hey, there isn't that comfort there. They want a degree of separation. They're Venmoing or cash apping each other, 20 or 30 times a month. They're creating like natural degrees of separation. So that's something that I wanted to find out initially. Like if I could only ask two questions, I asked the two like most important ones up front.
You do all these customer interviews, talking to friends and family, going to bars, doing all this stuff. How did all that information get distilled into the current version of Peas? Like this AI
Mm.
Penelope that can help couples manage their finances.
When it comes to the company building process, there's a lot of influences that come into what your initial product might be, your MVP might be. The first, obviously, hopefully, is you talking to your customers. Your customers are going to inform some semblance of something that makes sense. A lot of people don't do this as much as I would like. Like they may talk to friends and family, like, hey, I'm building this thing. What do you think? And take some feedback and then come up with an MVP. I wish people would kind of be more freakish like me and just go talk to everybody and anybody. But the second thing is once you understand from what your customers want, now like you need to see what's out there already. Are there solutions that are currently solving this problem? Are they band-aid solutions? Are they dedicated solutions? Are they competitors? All of that good stuff. So once I had a really good understanding of the competitive landscape, what solutions existed. So basically peer-to-peer tools like Venmo and Cash App and Zelle, the traditional joint bank account from like the money movement side, and then from the visibility side, just traditional budgeting apps that show you like charts and spreadsheets. I realized that we had a really good entry to the market by creating something that is valuable in both of those inflection points. Because we learned throughout these interviews that couples run into two big inflection points. The first one is visibility. So, what does our money look like? How much do we make? What bills do we pay for together? The second one is mobility. How are we going to pay for things together? Are you going to pay? Am I going to pay? Am I going to send you money? All that good stuff. We knew that we wanted to build an ecosystem there. And then we also knew that we wanted to ditch the spreadsheets and ditch the charts. Like there's no reason to be scrolling through infinite charts and trying to figure out what your money looks like. That's one of the reasons why Mint failed. So we wanted to use natural language where people can just talk to their money.
Interesting. Okay, so now when you have a question, you just ask Penelope, and then you get the answer immediately.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to know how much you spent on DoorDash the past 3 months, just ask.
We talked about your customer, and we talked about the product. So how does Peas make money? Is it like a subscription, or is it some other like monetization model?
We are extremely iterative and public in the way that we build. So we started off with a subscription fee. We started off charging $10 a month, and we got pretty abrupt signal that no one wanted to pay upfront. So
So
we
what was that signal?
people emailing us saying, "Hey, I want to cancel my subscription."
Okay,
And I emailed back saying, "Hey, would you be willing to use this for free?" And they're like, "Yeah, like I want to try it out for a while before I need
got
to
it.
pay for it." And this is something I think that Rocket Money did really, really well is they took the subscription path and said, "Hey, pay what you want. You can pay zero or you can pay some right now." And then later on, they started asking consistently, like, "Hey, are you willing to pay for this? We'll give you more features." So we're taking a similar approach. We're
Got it.
offering the PFM for free, so you can connect your bank accounts and learn about your money for free. And then some of the other features that we're releasing on our roadmap, like access to investments, access to crypto, access to liabilities like auto loans and mortgages, being able to get a full picture of your money, we're going to charge for. Or we have something very similar to Rocket Money for couples called the subscription squasher. So if a couple wants to come initially and find all their subscriptions that they're paying for together and squash them, we're going to help them do that.
So it's like a freemium model. Like you got like the core stuff is there, but then for the people who want more, they can pay a subscription to get that.
Yep.
Nice. So I'm really curious. This is like startup number 3. How has your perspective, your approach to product development evolved over these 3 different companies?
So I would say my product approach hasn't changed much.
Okay.
I think a lot of what's changed is the order in which I do things. So like the way I think about product, the way I architect product, the way I think about design and branding and some of the other like fun stuff that goes into like building a good product, none of that has changed. The order in which I do things has changed pretty ferociously. So the number one thing that's on my mind these days when it comes to product is distribution, right? So I'm very confident in building a strong feature set. As long as I know what to build, I know that I can do that. And not many people have that skill. I think that's why, like, product managers and heads of product are so important today, and like early stage and kind of like mid stage company building. But for me, I already know that I have those skills, so I focus on distribution almost exclusively now. How can I get this to customers? What partnerships can I make? How can I avoid spending all of my balance sheet on ads to get my product out? And that's something that's like really important, and a piece of advice I'd give to new founders is find flywheels that don't require you to spend money, even if they're unscalable. If you
Yeah.
have to literally go and interrupt people's dates and beg them, pay for their date and beg them to download your app, like, do it. That is much better than spending all of your money on ads over time.
So a lot more weight on the kind of marketing strategy, the go-to-market strategy, how to get customers to know about your product. Do you feel like if you were coming from a marketing background, it would be different? Like if you started in sales and marketing and then you had to learn product stuff later, do you think it would be inverted, or still like the order that you have now would be the same?
Likely, yeah. So one of the things I have, like, a personal mantra, is to like fall into your strengths and then hire people who are better than you for everything else, right?
Mm.
So I know my strength. Like, my strength is in product design, branding. I make stuff look really good. I make stuff work really well, and I have good ideas on how to provide value to specific problems. When it comes to the things I'm not good at, like, engineering or marketing in some cases, that is where I lean in and try to find the most help possible. So for me, or in the example that you gave, if I was just coming from like a sales background only, from a distribution background only, from a marketing background only, I think I would struggle with product, and I would find someone who's really good at product and knows how to make things look good. I would find someone who can take that thing that looks good and bring it to life from an engineering standpoint. I would find someone who can, help support the customers that come in, or do some business development from B2B, like all of that good stuff. So I think it's less of the inverse and more of playing into the strengths that you have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And last question on P's, which is, or kind of what you're saying, when you're going to find people, are these co-founders or these vendors,
Mm,
or is it a little bit of both, or is it just like one-off consultations? Like, how do you make up for your weaknesses, to support your strengths?
I'm constantly learning, so I am not going to act like I have the perfect answer to this, because hiring the right talent is difficult. I posted about this on LinkedIn. Finding the right people with the right mindsets, from the right backgrounds, with the right skill sets, and that relentless ferocity that I mentioned, it's very, very, very difficult. Sometimes they take the form of a co founder, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they take the form of a contractor. One of my best engineers, someone who's rocked with me across multiple companies, he's never come on as a co-founder. He's taken minimal equity. I've paid him for most of the work that he's done. He's ex Google, ex Citadel, like, incredible engineer, but he hasn't come full time. He has all of the markers except for me bringing him on board as like a co-founder, or someone who can rock with me, in that way, because that's not something he wants. Finding those people is really difficult, and you just have to be steadfast, like
Yeah.
understanding, like, hey, look, even though I'm having an issue like finding the right person, it's better to wait to find the right person than
Mm.
to make kind of a knee jerk reaction just because you need someone right now.
So it's better to wait than to hire the wrong person. If you could give one piece of advice to Dmitri when he started his entrepreneurial journey,
Oh,
what would that one single piece of advice be?
play more golf. Oh man, I spent, so from 19 to 27. I started cooling off at 27, but 19 to 27, basically nonstop grind, learning, ingesting. Especially once I got on Shark Tank. I was on Shark Tank when I was 22. So once that
Wow.
happened, I was in just a very different caliber of network, different conversations. Like, I was just thrown into a life that I wasn't expecting, and I didn't have that much fun. And one of the things that I've learned is life is precious, man. Like, you got to take some time to yourself, and make sure you keep that internal battery charged, because the only way that you're going to build great things for the world and provide value is if you're charged and on your A game as much as possible.
Yeah.
And burning yourself out for years is not the path.
Yeah, and I guess what's the point of entrepreneurship if like you're still going to be miserable? Because I feel like a lot of people they leave a job or they dream about leaving a job because they're miserable at it to become an entrepreneur. But I feel like this is like a piece of like ancient wisdom or something. It's like you have to learn how to be happy. Like just because like people think like, oh, if I change situations, if I quit the job, if I have X or I have Y, like that's going to make me happy. But I find like a lot of times, like you just have to learn how to be happy. Like that's like a skill set in of itself. And it doesn't matter if you're at a job that you don't like or you're trying to run a company that you love. Like you have to learn how to enjoy life and be happy.
100%. No, it's dude, you get it. It's so vital. Now that I have kids, like my perspective on life has changed, and company building when you are also building a family, like that's creates challenges of its own. And
Yeah.
making sure that I'm like charged and excited to do both every single day, like it's really really important. I do a lot of like self-help. I take some time to myself. I play video games. Like I do things that may like in the grinder's mind like be wasting time, but
Right.
I know that I have to. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no choice. I'll tell you one of the things that made me think this. I actually had a little bit of a health scare. So I was so stressed and like just pushing myself to the limit that I actually got shingles. And I don't know if you know what shingles are,
Yeah.
but it's like advanced chicken pox that attack your nerves. Not fun. 10 out of 10,
Yeah.
not recommend.
And it's typically people who are after 50 who get shingles, but people who are younger can get it if they have extreme stress. So that's not a good sign
Yep.
if you you get it
My,
if you're younger than
yeah.
50.
My doctor, she was like, look, take a vacation, like cool it. Like you got to go have some fun. And I told her, I was like, oh, well, I'm traveling around, like doing all these things for my startup. I was just in New York this time and I was at the beach, a couple months ago. And she's like, nah, like turn your phone off, go sit somewhere, have a bourbon. I know you like bourbon and relax. So I've taken that to heart. I've made sure that I do some self-help. So that's my piece of advice.
So where's this all going? So you're building Peas now. What do you see as like the trajectory of all this? Like where do you see all this effort going to?
I will never stop building. I have some like personal things that I want to solve in the healthcare space later on when, I have accumulated some more resources and learned a little bit more about this, company building process. But I've got a ton of ideas. If I could show you my phone right now, I've got dozens and dozens of ideas that I want to build just to make people's lives better. So until I'm in the grave, I'm going to be making people's lives better.
That's awesome. Dimitri, thanks so much for coming on, sharing your experience, like being so honest and transparent about like your lessons learned. It's super helpful to me. Like I've learned a lot through this conversation. And I know other people watching will as well. Where can people keep up with you? You were talking about your starting up on your content channels. Like where's the best place people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so find me on LinkedIn. Just type in Dmitri Love. No one else has my name on LinkedIn. And then on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Dmitri Love, BRAH. And then YouTube is TBD. Haven't decided on a channel name yet. So I was thinking about like Lovely Business, but I don't know yet. We'll see.
That's cute.
Yeah.
All right, Dimitri. Thanks again. Thanks everyone. Have a good
Cheers.
one.